tier list is closer to art than science and reflects the author's opinions. I value decks by ease of execution as well as their abstract strengths. I value mediocre decks with high roll potential higher than a deck that is just a worse something else. Welcome to our first tier, decks that win tournaments. These decks are both strong and easy to play, or strong enough to make up for being harder to play. Agents is the best deck in Tengu Plant. It's powerful, consistent, resilient, and easy to play. You should expect to face multiple agents in any serious tournament. I'd go as far as to say that if you can't consistently beat agents, you can't compete. The agent of creation, Venus, warps the format around her. Right now, Thunder King Ryo is everywhere, and Venus beats it going first and going second. Master Hyperion is the second best boss monster in the format, being easy to summon and having an immediate impact. Chaos Sorcerer wishes he was Hyperion. Non-believers tend to point to agents bricking or to the deck being linear as supposed flaws. I disagree with both arguments. Agents brick less, not more, than other decks. Watch any run and you can see agents winning with multiple shine balls in hand or dead boss monsters. You're as likely to draw double Tengu as double shine ball, and one of those is a lot worse than the other. Sure, some of your lines are linear, but in a simpler deck, sequencing it what separates the peasants from the kings. Your obvious lines beat most decks outright anyway. Your non-engine cards complement archetype very well. You have a better effect veiler in Herald of Orange Light. You are the best at using Tour Guide from the Underworld. Tragedia has perfect synergy with the deck. Agents have no real bad matchups. One of the most commonly mentioned one is Gravekeeper, but if you get tributed, you do. If you don't, you likely win. Agent also has access to some of the best side deck cards that not all decks can run, such as Royal Decree. And, conversely, opening a good hand means you're in the driver's seat, basically regardless of matchup. Not only does this deck use the best cards in the format well, that includes Trishula and Mind Control, but it also allows you to use Artlord Christia, a terrifying card that few other decks can run. There isn't a whole lot of ways to combat agents. Effect Veiler isn't much use unless you draw it really early. Koakime Rodrigo or to a lesser extent Thunder King Ryo don't really do much if they open Venus. Leeching the Light and to a lesser extent Ally of Justice Decisive Armor can blow them out, but lose to Honest and Herald of Orange Light respectively. So without further distractions, let's jump into the deck list. I think the best version of Agents is Trapless with Herald of Orange Light and Archlord Christia. My personal list is based on ATrueHero's second place decklist from Tengu Tussle 2, which I think is close to perfect. So let's dive into it. As you can tell, most choices are fairly obvious, so I'll immediately go on a tangent about TG Agents. The deck is good, better than most top tier decks, but it's worse than playing with both, and severely so than running without Tour Guide. This is evident from either reasoning or from heuristics. TGs do not significantly alter your early plays. Striker into Venus is good, since Trishula exists, but Venus is already good by itself. You should build around when you don't have Venus, not when you make a great setup better. The same is true for Genix ally Birdman, a card that I love, but that is typically win more. Bouncing a Veilered Earth is pretty nice though. Speaking about Earth, it's about the only card except Venus that has any kind of synergy with Striker at all. Tour Guide is both engine and follow-up by itself. TGs aren't. If I ranked TG Agents as its own deck, it would still probably end up at either low tier win or high tier can. So if you want to lose edge into both the mirror and other matchups, feel free to run TG Agents over standard. So back to the deck at hand. Why run Max C in the main deck? I have something called the Dragon Ruler theorem. The best deck runs engine, staples, hand traps and nothing else. Because why would you? Main decking Max C removes percentage from decks like TG, Hero, GK or Catsif. However, Maxi isn't like most cards. Having a reasonable baseline of being a 1-for-1 in either a threatening roar or non-aggression area isn't bad, and the omnipresence of Tour Guide helps here. You're not relying on Maxi to win you the game, though admittedly that is a bonus, but rather as something that isn't warning but also doesn't cost you a quarter if you're starting a life point to resolve. Max C also has excellent synergy with Orange Light. Your engine is usually stronger than theirs, so playing an upstart with no life point drawback is good. It's a bad top deck to be sure, but a good deck can get away with those. Another point of contention is, why run the Agent of Miracles, Jupiter, at all? Jupiter can be searched early if you open both Earth and Venus to beat a Ryo. It can beat a mid-game Leviathan, Caius, Stardust or Cyberdragon at no extra cost. It can theoretically manipulate for Christia, but for the record that's never been relevant in over 100 games for me. Jupiter is relevant when you Earth mid-game, as a vanilla 2600 normal summon is more relevant than a 1600 normal summon. Tragedia is an insane card, and Trag plus Jupiter or Earth into it is a clean auto Tengu that plays around both Warning and Torrential Tribute. Brionac is broken, and Konami should have banned it earlier, but Jupiter enables realistic lines into it, into a deck that otherwise lacks those lines. Jupiter will brick your hand early game sometimes, but the aforementioned reasons outweigh it. The next most common criticism would probably be the 2 MST, 2 Pot of Duality ratio. The short and sweet answer is, play 3 off of cards you always wanna see, and play 2 of the cards you never wanna see multiples. While tongue-in-cheek, this isn't far from reality. When opening Venus, you do not want duality in your opening hand. When opening Earth, nothing is better. Agents is an aggressive deck. You want to be able to play most of the cards in your hand. MST in the main deck is both a concession to side deck space and to being miced early game. Sometimes in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You will face Dimensional Fissure or Vanity's Emptiness game 1. That's where MST shines. If you expect a ton of mirror matches, those MSTs will be a liability though. As an additional sidetrack, MST in itself is worse at dealing with Warning, Bottomless Trap Hole or Torrential Tribute than, for instance, a Cyber Dragon or Chaos Sorcerer would be. MST is only better when facing a Floodgate. Having a Sorcerer out of Warning is better than destroying it with MST, not only due to the life point loss, but also due to Sorcerer being better when facing a bluff or otherwise dead back row. Why not drop to MSTs for Sorcerers then? MST is dead less often than Sorcerer, and having early Venus resolve is a priority, something that Chaos Sorcerer is unable to do. Most people tend to get hung up on a card per card basis. I don't agree. You should look at your deck like a well-oiled machine with moving parts. If you run 3 Phoenix Wingwind Blast, are you really not able to run a 4th card that discards, such as Karma Cat, Lightning Vortex, Raigeki Break, Back to Square One or Monster Incarnation? Why exactly 3? In a 40 card deck, having 7 of something is the golden rule to always opening it. How much worse is Raigeki Break really than Phoenix Wingwind Blast? 10% worse? 20? MST in Agents is just like that. Another card that pressures back rows while being worse than your actually good cards. Speaking of actually good cards, the one change I did make was swapping Treacherous Trap Hole for Trap Dust Shoot. Dust Shoot is overpowered. It's the best generic card post-Trinity ban up until its own banning in every format. Sure, Future Fusion or its ilk is better, but they're not generic. Every deck, barring exceptional exceptions, is better off with Trap Dust Shoot main decked than not. If you really like Treacherous Trap Hole, I'd go as far as to suggest running a Tretch and Dust Shoot. If you draw Dust Shoot before Tretch, you'll likely won anyway. If the opposite occurs, no harm no foul. People with rose-tinted goggles might fondly remember Warning and other power traps in Agents. This is pure bias as far as I'm concerned. Their liabilities when top-decked mid-game, especially in the mirror, and fix problems you don't have otherwise. Traps are better off in the side deck. Manning them is nicer when siding Decree, but forcing your opponent to bring in MST versus a handful of back rows is a win in card quality anyway. I'm not opposed to running Mirror Force or Torrential as additional traps. I just can't justify dropping anything for them. The problems Tretch deals with, notably Ryo, because what else, aren't dealt with unless your opponent plays into them. While Tretch is better mid-game, except in the mirror, you'd rather not see either at that point. If you do insist on playing Tretch, why not play 2 of them? It might be dead, you say, but that loops back to the Dust Shoot Tretch config mentioned earlier. Having Tretch as a singleton places it closer to a power card in deck construction, in which case you should go for additional copies if able, as consistently drawing it is so much better than not drawing it. If not apparent, I'm not a fan of treacherous trap hole. So let's pivot to talking about the extra deck. You rarely tend to make more than 2 Gachi Gachi Gantetsus in a single game, so running more is a waste. People tend to clutch their pearls when questioned about their extra deck choices in retro formats, but Tengu Plant via the introduction of XYZ monsters is really the first format where you can realistically make your entire extra deck over the course of a tournament. Whenever I get asked what to drop from an extra deck, my immediate question is always, what did you actually summon during your last run? That's why the extra deck contains 1 Leviar and 1 Leviathan Dragon, because in the vast majority of games, one of each is enough. Why no second level 6 synchro? There's really 3 options: Gaia Knight, Force of the Earth, Orient Dragon, and Flamvel Urquizas. Orient Dragon's strength, in general, comes from being immune to bottomless trap hole. You might have expected a longer list of cards, but ignoring Mirror Force, those cards aren't very good in Tengu Plant. Orient Dragon does not out Leviathan for free. I think Gaia Knight being able to out a monster then survive against an opposing Leviathan Dragon summon makes it the best option if an additional level 6 is needed. Being immune to Fiendish Chain is also a nice albeit rarely used bonus. Urquizas is obviously nice versus low defense monsters and, spoilers, I think Scapegoat is a hell of a card right now. While I think Instant Fusion is playable in Agents, since this build doesn't run it, I don't think Arcanite Magician is seriously in contention. While Bottomless Trap Hole does not see as much play as it should, I still do not think that Colossal Fighter deserves a spot in the extra deck considering how hard level 8s are to make. While being in the upper echelon of playable synchros, I do not think Magical Android deserves a spot in the extra deck. You do not need lights for your Chaos monsters, and the card isn't very good when Librarian exists and also has 2400 attack, being both a Catastor out and a beat stick. Speaking of Librarian, the card is a semi-floodgate versus decks that like to synchro as well as being a dark. Something I do run that not all agent lists do is a rank 4. As earlier mentioned, being able to out something like a Reborn Tengu with Tragoedia or Mind Control earns the nod for me. I choose number 39 Utopia over Steelswarm Roach. Due to the higher attack, Roach can win games, but you typically can't make force on demand. Roach being dark is somewhat valuable too. I wouldn't fault you for skipping this, because the deck only runs 1 real level 4 and 2 virtual in Tragoedia. The last somewhat unusual card is Ancient Farrier Dragon. I originally had Chimera Tech in this spot, since Cyber Dragon is one of few cards that matches up well against a Venus Gachi opening, but decided to side Chimera Tech instead since AFD should be easier to make and have a broader spread game 1. This deck has great side deck options, which is one of the strengths of Agent in my opinion. The third Maxi should be no surprise. It's a commonly sided card and I think most decks should have access to at least 2 and probably 3 between main and side combined. Cyber Dragons are great versus Stun, the Mirror and Machine decks. Closed Forest comes in against anything using field spells and being searchable by Ancient Fair Dragon is a nice bonus. In this deck we do play the full package of 3 MSTs and R55, but I'm general on 2 MSTs and 1 Lance rather than 3 MSTs. Lance matches up better versus Gemini Spark and Horn of the Phantom Beast among others, and the inability to hit field spells and the like is mitigated by having 3 Hyperion should you choose to play 2 MSTs. The Singleton Breaker is additional back row removal and something most people won't see coming. Unlike Dust Tornado, it can be played alongside Royal Decree. Being dark of course adds a lot of viability to the card. And then finally we have the traps. Royal Decree is a real beating for a lot of decks, even though you now have to flip it in the end phase rather than in response to a trap due to the existence of Solemn Warning. Mirror Force is just a second dark hole that people do not see coming. Mind Crush is for the Mirror. Most people will play Leeching the Light here, but I think the card is too hard to effectively resolve even in a deck that does spam monsters. When it does resolve, it can be game though, so I'm not saying it's a bad card. For a few more cards that could be included but aren't, the big one is Thunder King Ryo, which I think is an additional normal summon that does not advance your game plan. It's also not very good in the Mirror. Herald of Green or Purple Light are definitely good options if you can find something worth to negate with them, but the -1 kinda makes me wanna stay away from them. And lastly, Effect Veiler and DD Crow, 2 additional hand traps that you could theoretically play. I think the existence of Orange Light obsoletes Veiler in this deck. As for DD Crow, it's definitely an option and ATrueHero did run it, but until Dragoonity and to a lesser extent Zombie take a larger share of the metagame, I think its use is too limited, being marginal against Tengu Plant and Catsif, and dead against most other decks. And that's about all, not even remotely close actually, I have to say about Agents. Stay tuned for more.